What's up, everybody? So, I actually didn't realize this during my earlier video today, otherwise I might have talked about it then. But so far at least, the critical reviews for Mario Tennis Fever are in the 70s, once again. At least the averages. And that means it is just another mid-first-party Nintendo Switch 2 title. Which makes a lot of sense. I mean, first off, the console itself is kind of mid, in that it's a mid-gen upgrade, but it's also just mid in general. It's very whelming, I should say. Not under, not over. It's just there. It's a pro console. But even outside of that, the one thing that people like to argue every time somebody complains about the lack of games on the Nintendo Switch 2 is they like to list out the list of first-party titles and be like, hey, no other Nintendo console has launched with this many first-party titles. And it's like, well, yeah, technically you're right, and that argument has value, because normally, especially in the last few years, first-party Nintendo titles are always home runs, like they're grand slams. And I think that's actually a very big reason as to why there's such a massive discrepancy between how people feel and the quantity of titles that are actually put out. Right, like one of the biggest arguments that I always hear when people say that we're just complaining for no reason is they'll say that Nintendo Switch 2 haters have no taste because all they want is Smash Bros. Or 3D Mario. Which, first of all, I don't know how you can assume somebody has no taste when they love Smash Bros. And 3D Mario when those are like two very solid reasons to buy any Nintendo console historically. But even outside of that, the reality is, when you get a 3D Mario or a Smash Bros., more often than not, it's because it's a quality title. It's worthy of the high praise. Like, there are top-tier Nintendo first-party games, and historically, most first-party Nintendo games have been top-tier, both in the critic reviews as well as the user review ratings. And look, don't get me wrong, I understand Nintendo scores in general do tend to get rounded up a little bit. They get a bit of a bump. There are two very clear constant facts of life when it comes to Nintendo. There's a Nintendo tax in that you're going to be paying more if it has anything to do with Nintendo. And the scores and sales numbers are always going to be a little bit better just because they're part of the Nintendo world. It's like the whole Disney thing. But even despite that, let's say the Nintendo titles of yesteryear were only like, an 8 or a 9 and they got rounded up to a 9 or a 10. Now, after that Nintendo bell curve that they so generously get, they're landing on 7s and 8s. Like, what do we got? Mario Kart World. Flagship title. Sequel to the most loved Mario Kart title, probably in history. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe had like a 92% on Metacritic. Meanwhile, you're looking at Mario Kart World and it's sitting at 86. And if you ask most people out there, they're not going to say it's worth that 86. That's that Nintendo bump that they automatically get. And remember, most of those reviews came in when the game first launched and it was much easier to avoid the intermission tracks. I'm pretty sure a lot of these people, if they could go back and revisit this title and revisit their reviews, they wouldn't be nearly as generous. But still, this is the best-selling game on the Switch 2. This is the best-selling game on the fastest-selling console in history. This is the flagship title that launched with the console, and it's at an 86. Which isn't low, but this is the best of it. Remember, we're comparing it to launches that included Breath of the Wild. There were launches that included Super Mario 64. Launches that included Wii Sports. Games that people had to play and had to buy. And Mario Kart World was not a game that people had to buy. It was just French fries. Bonanza, 91. Excellent game, right? Everybody loves it. But I don't think everybody realized that was going to be the peak so early on. And keep in mind, again, while 91 is very good, there's still a drop-off. Super Mario Odyssey was sitting at a 97. It still is sitting at a 97 on Metacritic. Like, the difference in the peaks of these consoles is very different, specifically in those first-year titles. Bonanza is the best of the bunch, and it's at a 91. So the best of the Switch 2 does not live up to, like, the 3 best of the original Switch. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Breath of the Wild, and Mario Odyssey. And then after that, it's all just downhill. You get a Hyrule Warriors game, which once again scores in the 70s. Kirby Air Riders, it's in the 70s. Metroid Prime 4, 70s. Pokemon Legends ZA, 70s. And now Mario Tennis Fever, once again, another game in the 70s. 70s, after tax, after bell curve, after adjustment because it's the new console and the reviewers are all going to be trying to rate it higher just to please people, because we all know that they're all in Nintendo's pockets in one way or another. So this is ultimately what the issue is. One person looks at the first-party lineup of Nintendo titles that have released for the Switch 2 since the console came out, and they're like, with the amount of first-party games that we've gotten, I don't know how anybody could say that there's nothing to play on the Nintendo Switch 2. Because obviously the third parties don't really count, since most people are playing those elsewhere, and that's reflected in the sales with how poorly the third parties have been selling since the console launched. If you don't believe me, look at the financial reports. But even outside of that, when you're looking at it strictly from a first-party angle, you have Mario Kart World, which is good, and Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is great for most people. But then after that, it's just one mid-game after the other. These are mostly games that people are skipping over because they're definitely not worth the $70 price tag that's attached to them too. So it's creating this weird situation where both people are right. And wrong too, I guess. There are a lot of first-party Nintendo Switch 2 games, but very few of them actually live up to what that means. Normally, when you are a first-party Nintendo title, there's some gravity behind it, some oomph, especially those early release titles, and especially considering throughout the end of the Switch 1's life, it got really slow for a second there. People were waiting to be blown away with the launch of the Switch 2. But now you're getting one mid-game after another. And if people wanted to play average games, they didn't need to buy a Nintendo Switch 2 to play average games. Average games are available elsewhere for a much lower price. But you buy the Nintendo console for the Nintendo quality, the Nintendo seal of approval, the one thing that has kept people coming back for decades at this point. And that's why when so many people look back and they're like, I have not played a Switch 2 game since Donkey Kong Bonanza, it makes complete sense. Because there has not been a Nintendo quality caliber Switch 2 title since Donkey Kong Bonanza. And mind you, even Bonanza is not doing all that hot. Like, they shipped out a little bit over 4 million, which means they're probably sitting around 3.5 million total out of the 15 million Switch 2 owners out there, 15 million plus, I should say. To put things into perspective, by the time we got to February after the original Switch launched, Mario Odyssey had already sold through, not shipped, they actually announced it on the Switch 1. Mario Odyssey sold through over 7 million units. It was at 7.5, and the Switch 1 at the same time frame was at fewer than 14 million consoles sold. Mario Odyssey had an attach rate of over 50%, and it came out in October. That's Nintendo quality. That's what people are looking for. When your Odyssey caliber sales numbers and Odyssey caliber reviews are brought down and rounded down to what Bonanza's peaking at, obviously every other game that comes after it is going to be much lower. The peak of the bell curve is lower, so obviously everything else is going to be lower too. And now all we have is just a bunch of mid-tier Nintendo Switch 2 games filling out a calendar, while people are just anxiously awaiting for any fake direct rumor to pop up so they can cling on to hope that there's finally going to be a Nintendo Switch 2 game that they can feel proud about and justify their white knighting for Nintendo for the past year. You're gonna come to me and tell me Kirby is the game that everybody bought a Switch 2, which has a less than 1 in 15 attachment rate? Metroid Prime 4, which could not crack 1 million on the Switch 2, where it sold more than the Switch 1? Hyrule Warriors, a game where everybody was like, hey, we're kind of done with Breath of the Wild, and we're kind of done with the Hyrule Warriors franchise, but Nintendo, or Koei Tecmo I should say, put out a launch version of that anyway? Come on, dude, it's really not that complicated. The majority of people that buy a Nintendo Switch 2 buy it for the first-party titles. They don't care that much about the third parties, and we see it in the sales numbers. And the first-party titles for a Nintendo console, I think this is the first time in my life where so many of them are just mid. We are all very much just whelmed. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm not saying you can't enjoy them for the 750,000 of you or so that are actually buying them, and in the West it's probably only like 250,000. And these numbers, I mean, they're not always like the worst, but you're considering they're a first-party Nintendo title in the first year of a console launch, it's just really sad, because like the one thing that you have on Nintendo is those first-party games, and they've all been so middling. You know, the Switch 2 really should have been called the Switch Pro because it genuinely is a mid-gen upgrade in every sense of the word mid. The Midtendo Switch 2's legacy continues on, and the games are appropriately scored.